Hello and welcome back to the BCR Dawson Sub. In this last layout update for 2025, I'll share with you my progress on track painting at Chetwynd, Dawson Creek and Septimus. In my last layout update, I covered the process of painting all the mainline trackage on my layout. Since then, I have held 2 operating sessions, and after that I then shut down the layout so that I can get all the yard trackage in Chetwynd and Dawson Creek painted. I've decided to press on with track painting while the methods are still fresh in my mind and while my supply of local paints is still viable. I also created an isolating track at Chetwynd, so we'll have a quick look at that. And then I went back and completed the detailed painting of the track at Septimus. So let's get everyone caught up to date. The first step in preparing to paint the yard tracks was to mask off the backdrop and the fascia. So as before, I've done this with newspaper. So I've covered up the fascia, covered up the backdrops. The next step was to mask the turnouts in specific areas. So what I've done is I've masked the hinge point and the point where the point rails contact the stock rails and also the throw bar. So those have all been masked off. So this is a look at Chetwynd Yard, all ready for the painting of yard tracks. I also replaced some headblock ties that had gotten broken during operating sessions, and I was also missing a few ties here at the joint between benchwork sections, so those have been replaced. So we're going to start painting here fairly soon. All of the main line tracks have been done, and the green tape shows where I stopped as I approach the yard. And then we'll come up to Dawson Creek, same idea. All the turnouts have been masked off. There's a lot of track to be painted here, so once we get into the painting of the rails and the tie plates and so on, I expect this is going to take a while, so probably most of November and December to get all of this done. And I won't document it in the same detail that I did with the previous trackage because the methods are pretty much the same. But we'll take a few photographs as we go along, just to document the progress. Step 1 in the painting process for the yard tracks is to apply a primer coat of gray. Any light or medium gray will do. I happen to be using Tamiya AS28, which is called medium gray, but any shade of light or dark gray will do. And we also need a clean block for removing the paint from the tops of the rails as soon as it goes on. That's to keep them nice and clean and to avoid having to scrape paint off later on. So we'll put the respirator on and we'll get to work painting the yard tracks. While I'm painting tracks in Chetwynd Yard, I have a little side project that I would like to accomplish. One of the requirements for the NMRA's electrical certificate is to have storage tracks for motive power which can be isolated electrically, that is, to turn off power to a section of track. I did not do this when I laid my track for Chetwynd Yard. With digital command control, it's not really necessary, because if your locomotives are not addressed and having commands sent to them, nothing should be happening. However, it is a requirement, and I would like to put it in. So on the shop track in Chetwynd Yard, what I have done is cut gaps in the rails here and here. That section of track is long enough to accommodate 2 locomotives, which is a specification of the requirement. I cut those gaps using an X-Acto razor saw. The blade is 10 thou thick, so the gap between the rails is virtually invisible to the naked eye from back here. If you get up close, you can see it, but what it really looks like is 2 sections of rail butted up against each other, so that's fine. There are 2 feeder wires within this section of track that go down to the bus wire. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut one of the feeders in each pair going down to the bus wire, and splice in longer wires which will run out to the fascia and connect to this single pole, single throw switch. That will allow me to cut the power to this section of track from the fascia, and those locomotives will then be isolated electrically as per the requirement. So I've cut the gaps, and now we've got some wiring to do underneath to complete this little project. I've now connected the toggle switch to the leads, which will run back to the feeder wires for the isolating track. This is a single pole, single throw miniature toggle. That means that there is an off position and an on position. There's no center position. On the other side of the toggle, we can see that there is a pair of center tabs that are longer, and then there's a pair of short tabs on either side. If we orient the switch in one direction to be on, we want to solder the feeders to the opposite pair of tabs, and then I will know exactly which way to orient the toggle on the fascia. The soldering process involves cleaning these tabs, and that's done with a file to get them nice and shiny and clean. I then tin them with solder. I strip the insulation from the feeder wires and tin the bare wire with solder. I've actually laid the wire across both tabs in a pair just for redundancy, and then while that's happening I apply the soldering iron, and then that creates our solder joint between the 2. Sometimes these sub-miniature toggles do not survive this process of soldering. There's too much heat goes inside and cooks the insides. So we want to test this to make sure it's working before I install it. So I've connected the feeder wires to my multimeter. Right now you can see that the circuit is open, which means the switch is in the off position. And if we take that switch and turn it on, we get a tone, and you can see that the circuit is now closed, which means the switch is in the on position. So I know that my switch is working. This switch will be mounted into this little panel that's going to go on the fascia here, and that'll just indicate what's on and what's off. So it'll just mount in there like that. So the next step is to get that mounted on the fascia. These feeder wires will then run back to underneath my isolating track, and we'll get them connected to the feeder wires. So here are the leads from the toggle switch out on the fascia coming in, and I've spliced those into the feeder wires for the section of isolated track. I dropped a wire down through the hole just to make sure I had the right pair of feeders, because there's quite a few in this location. So here's one splice and here's the other splice. So now that that wiring is complete, we'll go topside and test it. So here we have 2 locomotives sitting on the isolation track. Hopefully you can see the lights and hear the sound. So that tells me that the isolation track is currently powered. And the switch on the fascia is currently in the on position. If I switch it to the off position, you can see we lose the lights and we lose the sound. So now I know the isolation track is dead. If I return the switch to the on position, you'll see the lights come back on and the sound will spool back up. So that completes this project. So I've now met one of the criteria for the civil certificate, which is to provide a storage track for motive power to which the power supply can be cut. If you would like to learn more about isolating tracks and how they work, I've actually posted a tutorial video on this channel which explains how they work and how I installed mine in pre-existing trackage on the layout to go into a little more detail. So look for tutorial video number 6 on this channel. Step 2 in painting the yard tracks is going to be the application of the base color. I'm using Railroad Tie Brown from Floquil, but any sort of brown color that you are happy with will do. And in addition to the paint, we will also need the track cleaning blocks again. These are just blocks of wood that can be moved along the rail to remove the paint as soon as it's gone on. So this gets applied with an airbrush, and I will need to wear a respirator, so we'll get suited up and then we'll get going on painting the yard tracks in their primary color. I've now applied the gray primer coat and the brown primary color to the yard tracks in Chetwynd and Dawson Creek. This is Chetwynd. I've gone a little darker in the area of the turnouts. They tend to be darker because of all the oil and lubricants in the area. So these are starting to look more like rail yards now. Still a lot of detail painting to be done yet. So that's Chetwynd Yard. And then we come up here to Dawson Creek. So there's lots of rail to be painted, lots of tie plates to be hit. This will probably take a month or more, I should think. So that should last all of December. Looking forward to getting it finished. So there we go. Progress in the yards. Track painting at Septimus is now complete. I originally sprayed this area gray and then brown back in the summer when I was doing the mainline trackage. And I wasn't very happy with the results of the brown here. This is actually where I started, and it took a while to get the flow of paint correct coming out of the airbrush. But when I went to spray the yards in the fall here, I elected to respray this area, and now I've done all the detailed track painting. So it's taken me about a week to get through this. This is about 11.5 feet of track. So the white dry brushing, the black wash, painting the rails, painting the little tie retention clips. And here we are at the north switch. And then here we come to the end of trackage. So this area is now done. It's good to have this finished, and now we'll move on to painting the 2 yards. As always, a big thank you to friends who've assisted with certain portions of layout work along the way. In this case, my friend Kyle kindly loaned his airbrush and compressor again so that I could get the yard tracks sprayed brown, so that was a big help. I'd also like to thank all those who subscribe to this channel and who have shared comments. And as we close out 2025, I would like to wish everyone a happy new year. So thank you for watching, and I hope to be back with another update in the spring. Until then, peace be with you.